Well, hello and welcome to this very special conversation. I'm Ridhima Bhatnagar. Made in Heaven Season 2 recently dropped on the OTT platform. While most of the viewers have really appreciated the storytelling and the performance of characters, there is now new controversy that is now being seen as far as claims that have been made by writer Yashica Dutt. She, in fact, has gone on to say, while on one hand she has appreciated the storytelling, it is one particular episode that seems to have become a little problematic, which is the coming out of a Dalit, which in fact features Radhika Apte. Now, this writer, Yashica Dutt, has put out a long post on social media platforms where, as I pointed out, it's very balanced if you read it. She's gone on to say that she appreciates the storytelling that is being put out because more people need to see the struggles of Dalits, but she also feels cheated in a way or let down in a way that this was her own story, but it's not been treaded anywhere as far as the makers are concerned. Let's get better context of what really has happened. I, in fact, have Yashica Dutt now joining me on the broadcast to help us understand why she put out that social media post and has she heard from anyone associated as far as the series are concerned. Yashica, thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking to us here at CNN News 18. I would have really liked it if you were speaking under better circumstances. As I pointed out when I started, that as a viewer, I was waiting for season 2. I enjoyed watching season 2, and specifically this episode featuring Radhika Apte and the story and the struggles of Dalits as far as a country like India is concerned. But then we all saw the social media posts that you put out, and there were a sense of unease in most of us as viewers. Before I talk to you about your own struggles, your book, I want to understand, as far as the making of this episode of the series were concerned, did you have any idea that something like this was in the pipeline?
Thank you so much for having me, Ritima. I had no idea. I found out much like everybody else when, in fact, differently than everybody else. A friend of mine texted me on Instagram and said, "Have you seen this episode?" And my response to her was, "Well, it's about weddings and I'm not married. So what do you mean it's based on me?" And she said, "It seems like it's based on you." And she said, "Why don't you just watch it and judge for yourself?" So I immediately went on my laptop and I, watched it. And within the first 5 minutes of the episode, it was very evident that the character of Pallavi Menke was speaking the exact lines that I've spoken in many interviews in the past, whether it's about her coming out as, she doesn't say coming out as Dalit, but her coming out in the context of being Dalit, or whether how her grandmother used to manually clean toilets. Now that makes her Bhangi, and that is a Dalit Bhangi author at Columbia who has written a book about coming out. The similarities were far too obvious for me to not notice. I mean, there were some words that were exactly what I've said, maybe with a word or two different in many interviews in the past.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to understand, Radhika. In a way, you've answered that by the end of your answer, which is that what are the kind of similarities that you saw with your own life and the character Pallavi. But I also want to talk about the post that you put out. And as I said when I started this conversation, that it was not bitter in nature. Yes, it also lauded the efforts that have been made by people like Neeraj, but it said that possibly we want to be seen as an equal, and that kind of credit should have come.
Ridhima, thank you so much for being sensitive to sort of pick on the emotions that I've been trying to convey in my post. I am not bitter at all. I love the episode. My initial reaction on seeing my likeness on screen, as would be for anybody, was thrill and excitement. And it was exciting to see a character like that so closely resembles to me being portrayed on screen. But at the same time, when I realized and when it dawned on me actually that I'm watching this episode in the United States where my book is not released yet, and this will be seen by millions of viewers, Dalit, non-Dalit, Indian, non-Indian, non-South Asian, across the world, I realized that there is no direct link back to my work or to my ideas. There is no way that anybody else who is not a part of this conversation knows that that's me. But there are enough of us who do know that's me. Like I've been hearing from thousands of people ever since I put out my post on Monday. I'm sure you've seen the discourse. People can easily see the similarities. And I want to say there is no bitterness on that end. Neeraj has created phenomenal work. I call it a cinematic triumph in my post. And that's for a reason. It's because we've not seen a Dalit female character portrayed so brilliantly on screen before. The hesitance that she has about asserting herself in a very complete way, and the navigating of different identities, her being in New York and her family being in India, those are very sensitively portrayed. So I think there is so much value, tremendous value, that is to be gleaned from this entire episode. I think everybody, and I hope your viewers are watching this, I think everybody should see this. But at the same time, all I'm saying is, if folks can so easily recognize that's me, then credit is where credit is due. And that's all. This is not an example of, demanding for cancellation or demanding that this be taken off or anything like that. I'm appreciating this. I'm trying to say that this is a wonderful and beautiful piece of art, but can we also acknowledge people who have so clearly inspired at least one of its central ideas? That's my entire point. I saw a lot of headlines where news outlets, we understand Indian journalism in India, they've said I've slammed the makers, which is absolutely not true. How is this slamming? I am calling them in. This is not calling anybody out. That's the best I can do in my position as somebody with a voice, that I can call people in and help them understand and hopefully further this narrative to counter this trend of taking from writers, from people who create these narratives without credit. That's all I'm doing. There is no bitterness. I would love for everybody to see this episode because it's very important to see Dalit stories on screen, and especially the way Neeraj has done it.
Yashica, I want to talk about this phrase coming out, which anyone who is familiarized with your book, Coming Out as Dalit, would say that you, in a way, have popularized this phrase, which in many ways has been used in the series as well. For people who are not very tuned with your own life story and struggles, would you want to talk to us about how it was growing up as Dalit in India, then moving overseas, and the kind of struggles you had to face on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I mean, coming out as a word, right? People have used it across the world in the context of being queer. People have said we are coming out as gay, we're coming out as bi, coming out as trans. That exists. For me, this particularly struck a chord when I was at Columbia. I had just worked in Hindustan Times in Delhi. I'd worked as a journalist for a decade, and I was hiding my identity. I grew up hiding my Dalit identity. I want the viewers to know I'm from the Bhangi caste. And that is not just a Dalit caste, it's a Dalit untouchable caste, which is at the lowest, most bottom point in the totem pole of the caste system. Our presence in communities is considered untouchable, and there is so much heinousness that is associated with this identity that people who are Bhangi can only understand the shame that we live with. And because my family were able to access reservation and had 2 or 3 generations of education, which was denied to us before, that's when we decided that we were going to hide our identity. Because, think about it. I was born and raised in Rajasthan, in Ajmer. My mom was told that having one girl was one girl too many. They didn't want a girl child. So being a Dalit woman in those circumstances, I had no other choice but to hide who I was. I grew up changing my last name, hiding my identity. And this is not just my story. This is something that Dalits have had to do for many, many years. Many Dalits across India do that. The only thing that I did was to reveal my identity and take back ownership of that. I think that discourse is certainly something that I can credit back to myself. And I mean, let's think about it. As we are not used to seeing Dalit women assertively saying, this is mine. This is something I contributed. Somehow, as part of our culture, saying that I did this is considered a matter of shame, especially if it's a woman, even more so if it's a Dalit woman. All I'm saying is that I created a part of this discourse. It's a part of popular terminology now. People understand what coming out as Dalit means. And that is certainly my contribution. I'm not asking for anything beyond that. So I think it's important to link back to the work and the discourse that I've created, because it is so easy to steamroll over the labor of Dalit people and Dalit women in particular. I mean, we've seen the Indian feminist movement. Dalit women leaders were at the forefront, leading ideas, creating change. But when it came to giving them credit, they were cast aside. This is not just my one instance. This is just, this is a pattern of erasing Dalit labor that has existed. And now that we are at this critical juncture in the movement, in the narrative, when we are seeing such powerful stories, we have to do things right. And that's all that this is a call for. And I came out as Dalit I just want to add, I came out as Dalit in 2016 with, a post that said, today I'm coming out as Dalit, because I revealed my caste that I was hiding for so long and asserted my Dalit identity with pride. I was not shameful of being Bhangi anymore. And that is uniquely my story, and also the story of so many Dalits who then felt inspired to do the same.
And this is where, Yashica, I wanted to understand, when you speak about your mother not being sure that if you came out, whether responses would change or not, I want to go back to a particular scene as far as this episode is concerned, where the brother of the character, Pallavi, also says that, you want a Dalit wedding, but did you even ask us whether we wanted a wedding like this? Are you not outing us when you come out? Are you asking us whether we're comfortable or not? Is that the kind of struggle that you saw within your own family members as well?
I think, first of all, I'd like to say this is an experience that is collective to so many people who have since then revealed their Dalit identities and chose to stop hiding. So many of us hide our identities. And when we choose to stop doing that, we out ourselves, but also in some ways our families. When I came out as Dalit in 2016, there was similarly a conversation around that. And I was asked this question repeatedly. Are your parents okay with this? Is your family okay with this? And I've talked about this in the book, that my family was not initially on board. My mother was very hesitant about what it would mean to sort of just release this secret that we have held on for so long. And she was very worried about how this would impact my career, my chances of having any kind of friends, and just, the discrimination that I was going to face. For people who live with identities that are out in the open, Rohit Vemula, for example, and so many other countless Dalit people, I think this is not a struggle that, they've already endured. This is something that they've already accepted. They've never hide themselves. And that is a really courageous thing to do. But for those of us who are not able to live with our identities out in the open, it is a matter of almost life and death. It's not really, but it feels like so significant. And for my mother, that was a huge concern. So I would say that, this was something that I had to deal with as well. They were worried about if I'm outing my siblings too.
So were those concerns of your mother valid then, Yashica? When you did come out, did people's attitude towards you change? Did you lose friends?
I think, Ridhima, my story is different from a lot of people because look at where I live. I don't live in the country. The fact that I live in New York, and this is something that I think they've talked about in the interview portion as well, the fact that I live in New York is the reason I was able to come out as Dalit. It's because nobody questioned me, my caste over here. For the first time, I was able to be removed and have objective distance from the question of my caste. Growing up in India, growing up in Rajasthan, moving to Delhi, all anybody did was ask me what my caste was. After moving here, just after a year, I realized that I was finally free from that. And then I was able to reveal my identity from what's a relatively safe distance. I want to be very cognizant that I didn't do this while living in India, where a lot of people actually do that. I did it from the safe distance of being in the US, where it didn't matter if I had Indian friends or not who could discriminate against me. I have friends from a lot of different nationalities who are not aware of the caste system. And, the line that Pallavi Menke says, here, I'm just a woman of color. I've said that many, many times. Here, I'm just a brown woman. Here, I'm just a woman of color. And being, living in this racist culture that we live in America, being a brown woman is a whole different story. But at the same time, at least I'm not easily identified as Dalit. At least I can breathe and say, I don't have to hide my caste anymore. And that's why I was able to do that living in the US in 2016.
Well, that's a valid point that you're making, that your journey, even though it's similar to many in India, it's also very different because you decided to come out when you were not in India, and that's why possibly it became a lot easier for you, because there you were just seen as a woman of color and not by your caste. But I want to go back to what's happened as far as the series and the episode is concerned. Even that long, lengthy social media post that you put out, you said that even though you want your credit, you want your due, you will still continue to support the director and people like Neeraj, because they've done a lot to bring the struggles of Dalits to the mainstream media. He did put out a social media post or a story where your name was mentioned. Do you think that was an afterthought, or do you think it was coming too late in the day?
Right. I think why that credit came and how that came, that is not for me to answer. I think Neeraj will be a better person to say why he decided to do what he decided to do. But at the same time, my only concern is it's an Instagram post. And sure, social media has so much currency, but at the same time, this show will be watched across the world. People in